Hello all, welcome to the next video in this TCP series, and today we will be looking into the data transfer in TCP, how a data is transferred between client and a server, and how two directional data transfer takes place. We will understand this in today's video. But before we move on, let's have a quick recap of what we saw in the previous video. We saw a three-way handshake between a client and a server, how a sequence number is allotted to the ghost bit, right? And how acknowledgement plays a role here, and how receive windows between a client and a server is discussed or is negotiated, right? We understood all those things. So keeping that in mind, let's move to the data transfer. So let us assume that a client is sending some information to the server, right? So a client takes a sequence number, for example, a sequence number of 1, right? And it assigns it a length of 100, meaning that there are 100 bytes in this particular segment, right? It also tells the server that the acknowledgement that I am expecting from you should have a sequence number of 101. Why is that so? So assume that this is a segment, right? So this segment has 100 bytes. So the sequence number that you see always is the sequence number of the first byte in that particular segment. So in this segment, the first byte will have a sequence number of 1, the second will have 2, the third will have 3, etc. And the last byte in this segment will have a sequence number of 100, right? So when the server responds with an acknowledgement and that acknowledgement has 101 as its sequence number, the client will know that the server has received all the bytes in that particular segment, right? It also tells this information to the server, right? That is what here 101 means. Now this particular information is sent from client to the server, right? Now the server, what it does, it also sends a response to the server, right? Now it responds with an acknowledgement of 101. Now let us assume that the server is also sending some information back to the client, right? It will also send this information to the server. So server creates its own segment with a sequence number, right? So let us assume that the sequence number of the first byte here is 1001. The length here is 1000, right? And here server also tells the client that the acknowledgement that it should expect, right? The acknowledgement that it should expect from the client is is 2000, correct? Why is it 2000? Because the starting sequence number is 1001, and if we have 1000 such bytes, the 1000th byte will have a sequence number of 2000, correct? Sorry, so this acknowledgement should not be 2000, it should be 2001. This information is sent from the server to the client, provided that there is a bidirectional information. So let us think that the green part is the information being sent from the server to the client, or and the red is the session being sent from the client to the server, right? Now this information is sent from the server to the client. In this particular information, please understand that the acknowledgement here is the acknowledgement for the information that is sent from the client to the server, and the server is responding it with an acknowledgement, and it is also sending its own information from itself to the client. Right now, when this is received by the client, what client does is, now it has some more information to send. Right now, that particular information will have a sequence number of 101. Right, length, let us assume that the length again is 100. Okay, now the acknowledgement that it should receive from the server should be 201, because we have 100 bytes of data. So from 101 and 100 bytes more would give us 200 as the last sequence number of the last byte. So the next sequence, or the acknowledgement number, sorry, the sequence number of the acknowledgement should be 201. This is sent from client to the server. Now the client also responds with an acknowledgement, right, for the acknowledgement of this particular information that is sent from the server. So here the acknowledgement bit is set to 1, acknowledgement bit, okay, not the acknowledgement sequence number, right, and the sequence number for this acknowledgement would be 2001, that we already saw here. Now here the server is now responding back with an acknowledgement as 201. Right now, if there is any other information that the server has to send to the client, it also sends the same with a sequence number of 2001. Right, let us assume that the length is 1000 bytes or 1000. Right, so the acknowledgement that it should receive from the client for this particular segment should be 3001. Why? We have 2001 as the first byte. The last byte will have a sequence number of 3000. So the acknowledgement we should receive is for 3001. Now, this information is sent from server to the client. Please do not get confused that these are two different messages. No, they are one single message. Right, they are one single data transfer that is being taking place between the client and the server. So there are two different set of information that is being sent across the client and the server, and I have marked them in red and green to differentiate the acknowledgement and the sequence number that is being exchanged between the client and the server. Now, if there is a data establishment, a data transfer, this establishment should also terminate at some point of time, right? So TCP also has a uh, termination as well, right? So since the way we have three-way handshake, we have a termination handshake as well, a three-way termination handshake, you can say. So what happens in this TCP termination handshake is that the client initiates a termination session, right? So what it does is that since there is always a data transfer that is happening between them, right, now what the client does is client chooses the sequence number based on the last data transfer it did. Okay, so here let us assume that the sequence number that the client chooses here is 300. Okay, the length because there is no data transfer here, the length for this is 0. Okay, and it also mentions the acknowledgement number that it is expecting from the server for this is 301. You can expect or assume this as the ghost bit that we spoke about in the three-way handshake as well, right? Now here the fin bit instead of sin bit that we saw in the three-way handshake, here the fin bit, this fin bit here, this is set to 1 and is sent from the client to the server, right? Now what the server does is that server has to acknowledge it, right? So the server first acknowledges it, right? It sets the acknowledgement bit to 1. It sends a sequence number for this as 301, but it also sends its own fin message that it is accepting. It has accepted the fin message from the client, but it is also sending its own fin message, right? So here it sends its own fin message, right, with again a sequence number, right? Here it also sets a fin bit, right? A fin bit of 1, right? And it also sends its own acknowledgement number that it is expecting from the client. So the sequence number here can be anything based on the last data transfer that the server did from its own side. So let us assume that the sequence number here, assuming, right? So let us assume that the sequence number here is 700. Okay, the length here would be 0 again, and the acknowledgement that the server is expecting from the client for this particular fin message is 701. This is sent from the server to the client. Now upon receiving the acknowledgement from the server, sorry, upon receiving an acknowledgement from the server, the client, it responds to this particular fin message with its own acknowledgement, right? So the acknowledgement here is set. So the acknowledgement bit is set to 1 with a sequence number of 701, and this is sent from the client to the server, and hence the termination happens between client and server. So this is called the fin message. This is called the fin plus ACK because we have an acknowledgement for the fin bit that is received, and this fin is the fin created by the server, right? And then we have an acknowledgement received from the client for this fin message. So we have fin, finac, and ack, similar to sin, synac, and ack. And this is how a TCP termination takes place. Now let us see this in real time. Okay, so I'll capture packets over my Wi-Fi connection, right? Now it is capturing packets. Okay, so let's go to the command prompt and let's do a telnet to www.google.com over port number 80. Okay, and I'll push few things into this and close this and stop the capture. So let us filter out the TCP packets here. TCP dot port equals 80 and sort them based on the time, right? So here, if you see, we have a couple of TCP packets, right? So we will see SYN, SYNAC, ACK, then you have couple of data messages, and then when I closed the command window, it sent a termination message. Was a termination message or a termination information is being exchange between the client and the server. So you have FIN, FINAC, and ACK. This acknowledgement that you see here is the acknowledgement for the previous message that was received, right? So this is not FINAC. This is actually a FIN message. Then you have a FINAC and an ACK. We'll go through all this one by one now, right? So starting from the three-way handshake, right? So let us expand this here. So in a three-way handshake, you see we have a source port, we have a destination port, right? And the stream index here is given as 5. Okay, so this stream index in Wireshark, what it means is that this is the fifth TCP stream, okay, or fifth type of TCP stream that is happening over my Wi-Fi connection. Okay, so this is the fifth TCP stream. So other TCP streams may happen over different destination ports, right? So this particular TCP stream is happening over port number 80, and it is fifth stream over my Wi-Fi connection. Okay, so the sequence number for this particular SYN message is 0, right? The next sequence number here in Wireshark, whichever information you see inside the square back brackets is not an actual information that is being sent between the client and the server. This is a helpful information given by the Wireshark itself, right? So this stream index is actually not a part of this TCP connection that happened over port number 80. This is actually an information, extra information that is provided by the Wireshark, right? Now we have a length of 0. The sequence number for this SYN message is 0. The acknowledgement number or the next sequence number that I would send is with number 1, and I am also expecting that the acknowledgement number that I received from the client should also have a sequence number of 1, right? Now here, if you see, the SYN bit is set to 1, right? The next, the server is sending an acknowledgement as well as its own SYN to the client, right? So its port number is 80. The destination port is given here, right? The sequence number for its own SYN is 0, right? And it is sending an acknowledgement number of 1, right? It is sending an acknowledgement. This particular acknowledgement is the acknowledgement for the SYN that it received from the client. Okay, so give me a moment. Let me open a drawing pad here or an annotation pen. So this particular acknowledgement is for the SYN message that it received here. The first SYN message that we see, this is the acknowledgement number for that. Okay, now it has its own sequence number, right? This is the sequence number for the SYN sent from the server to the client. Okay, so let me draw a diagram here that we have a client and we have a server, right? So this sequence number is the sequence number for the SYN message that is sent from the server to the client, right? So, and we also have an acknowledgement. This acknowledgement is for the SYN message that it received from the client. Okay, so first is your SYN message, then you have a SYN message from the server, and also an acknowledgement, right, for this SYN message. Okay, now the next, if we see, is an acknowledgement, right? This acknowledgement from the client to the server is the acknowledgement for this particular SYN message, right? And that particular SYN message has a sequence number of 1. Okay, and the length here is 0. So this is your three-way handshake that is taking place. Okay, moving on to the next message, right? We have something here. So we have the same source port, we have destination port, but we have a length of 1, right? So length of 1, and the sequence number for this particular segment is 1, right? And thus it just has 1 byte of information, right? So here we have a client and a server, right? And it is sending some information, right? So the information here is that the sequence number for this information or data is 1, right? The next sequence number is 2, meaning that I should receive an acknowledgement from the server with the sequence number, sorry, with the acknowledgement number of 2. Then only I can be assured that the server has received my information. Okay, so that is what this particular next sequence number means, right? The acknowledgement here is 1. This particular acknowledgement is for the information that is received from the client to the server over here, right? Because there is no length here, that is why the acknowledgement number is also 1. The information, the length is 0 here. Okay, now if you see the next couple of data that is being exchanged between the client and the server, here the client alone is sending the data, right? The client is alone sending the data with a length of 1. The server is not at all sending any data, so the length from the server to the client is 0. If you see, all these information has a length of 0. Keeping that in mind, let's quickly go through all this information. Okay, so we have a sequence of 1 with a length of 1, right? We have a sequence number 1 with a length of 1. So naturally the acknowledgement that I should receive from the server should be 2, right? So if we go to the next message, we will see that the acknowledgement that the server has sent is 2. The sequence number from its own side is 1, because there is no there is no data that is received. There is no data. If you see here, this particular message that is sent from client to the server, right, it does not have any data, right? So here the acknowledgement number remains, so the sequence number remains the same, right? Next, similar information is being exchanged with the sequence number being incremented from the client side, not the server side. So if you see here, sequence number is 1 because the length is 1. The next sequence number is 2 because the length is 2. For example, if this length for some reason was 10, right? If this length was for some reason was 10, the sequence number here, right, would have been 11. Okay, the sequence number here would have been 11 that we had discussed earlier in this video. Okay, so similar messages have been exchanged between the client and the server, right? Now, when we closed the command prompt, okay, when we closed the command prompt, a fin message from the client to the server was sent, right? A fin message. For that particular fin message, the sequence number was 15. Okay, the next sequence number that the client is expecting, sorry, the next sequence number the client is expecting, or the acknowledgement number that is expecting, is 16. Okay, and the length of this particular fin message is 0. But why is it incrementing? You can consider it just like the ghost bit that we saw in the three-way handshake. Okay, so since this is actually a fin message, the server is supposed to acknowledge this fin. How will the client know that the server has received my fin message? Until and unless the server increments that particular sequence number, and hence the next sequence number that it is expecting from the server is number 16, right? With the acknowledgement number of 16 received from the server, now the client knows that it has successfully sent its fin message. Right now, this message also has a fin and an ACK. Right, so if you see here, we have two flag bits set, that is fin and an acknowledgement number, but the length remains 0 because there is no data that is being exchanged between the client and the server. Okay, so the next is SYN here, right, with a sequence number of 16, with a sequence number of 16 and an acknowledgement number of 2. And here the termination is done between the TCP and the TCP termination is completed between the client and the server. I hope this video was informational. Please do comment in the comment section for any clarification, and I will be glad to explain it in the next video. Thank you and have a great day.